Hello, Jennie Date.
Hi, Lori Farrington.
All right, so today we are doing our video about the Sagittarius moon. And what we're looking at today is the natal moon. And first, before we talk about Sagittarius itself and the moon in Sagittarius, we want to talk about what exactly the moon itself represents in the chart. The moon represents a lot of things. It's like, astrology is funny because it's a symbolic language. There's layers and layers and layers of meaning to each and every symbol. And with the moon, what we're really looking at are issues of emotion. The moon represents our emotion. It represents our instincts. Noel Till talked about the moon as representing the reigning need of the personality. In order to live any sort of a happy life, you've got to feed your moon. So you want to always think about that. How do I feed my moon sign? And in a minute, we'll talk about how best to feed your Sagittarius moon. The moon, the other thing to always think about is there's the ways that you feed it in a healthy way. And then there's also the other side of the moon is it also represents and points to the biggest ego challenge that we face in our life. So, ideally, we want to look and understand the challenge we face and figure out how to find the more positive, uplifted side of that to move into. So there's that. And you want to start out, Jennie, talking about what the need of the Sagittarius moon is?
Yes, so the reigning need is to have one's opinion respected. So there's a big piece about having a giant opinion with Sagittarius, and that there's a desire through the Sagittarius moon to expand awareness. So that's the short version.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. When you said that, I'm sorry, I'm jumping right in to interrupt you, but when you said it, there's a few things that I have to say about Sagittarius. Is if you think about that, the centaur with the arrow, rather than thinking about Sagittarius being represented by that centaur, think about the perspective from the arrow once it's up there in the air, that overriding perspective. That's really what Sagittarius is looking for, is that big picture, that big, that, yeah.
Well, another thing to think about too, as we break down these moon signs is, well, Sagittarius is a fire sign, but it's mutable fire. So there's a heat to it. There's that, there's a, maybe a little bit of a showboat aspect that you might see with Leo, but there's also a little more changeability in terms of kind of natural to natural consideration might be like the Sagittarius fire is like the coals, the embers in the fire after it's died down. So in other words, those embers could then be taken to go light another fire. So that's a little more of what we're looking at with the Sagittarius fire.
Okay. Yeah. And the real ego challenge, the real struggle with a Sagittarius moon is that being overly opinionated. Sagittarius has tends to be relatively tactless. They are not subtle. That energy is not a subtle energy. It can be very demanding and opinionated and tactless. There's, another thing that I always want to bring up with Sagittarius is this idea of humor. Humor is one of the great uses of Sagittarius, I think. That ability to be tactless, but to kind of spin it in that, with humor, in showing that wider perspective, if that makes sense. So yeah, the response to be cultivated is humor, wisdom, and that wide range of understanding. Through what? Through study, through opening up awareness of different viewpoints. That's what Sagittarius, because of that tendency to close down into one opinion. That's the negative side, is closing down into that one opinion. And the positive side is opening up and seeing the full view.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, it's very optimistic and exploratory and idealistic, so that the highest potential of that Sagittarius is the expansive spiritual direction, as I mean, is what you're saying.
Right.
And that some of the archetypes associated with it are like, can be like the missionary, the preacher, but also the explorer, the philosopher,
right.
Somebody who's got wide experience.
Right.
So,
and the gypsy, the traveler.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyone, that's an interesting thing to think about too, is, the moon is our emotional nature. And people with a Sagittarius moon have, are very lucky because emotionally they tend to be able to pull themselves out with that optimism a lot easier than a lot of people do. And if they struggle with difficulties around that, they can, go on a road trip, watch a documentary, find ways to see that broader perspective. So, the moon also being about mother and mothering, that's going to bring in a lot of the more positive side of, there's the tendency to see those relationships in a more positive light.
Yeah.
What else about the moon? Anything else about the moon in Sagittarius, or are we ready to look at our example?
No, I think we've covered it pretty well.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right. So for our example, who are we using today?
We are using Stephen King.
Okay. Now let's see if I open up the right one, because I realize I've got two here and I might get the wrong one. Oh, there, we got the right one.
Perfect.
Good.
Look at that chart.
All right. And let's see. First of all, look at this. That opinionated Sagittarius moon is in the 5th house, which is about creativity.
That's right.
All right. What else do you see about that moon that you want to mention?
Well, if you look so it's a fire sign. So there's a lot of other fire signs in this chart. So if you look over at Pluto and Saturn in the 1st house, those things are in Leo. So there's that kind of darker, intense, like the macabre, I think about like The Shining, a book he wrote, just like there's some intensity there. So that's in a nice, easy flow. That's a trine aspect. Nice, easy flow. And then guess what else is in fire? If you look up at the top of the chart, there is the midheaven, which represents his vocation in Aries. So basically he's got a grand trine in fire, which means that he is going to funnel that energy out through his career and his writing, and it's a creative act because it's the 5th house, and it's inseparable from who he is because he's got Pluto and Saturn in the 1st house of self. Wow.
He had no choice. He had no choice but to be kind of famous for this this challenging, his personality has that Pluto and Saturn right there. He can't get away from those dark stories.
Yeah.
And to be dramatic with them, but it funnels right into that creativity and right to the career. That is beautiful. So that's beautiful.
It's just that grand trine. So this is a grand trine. You probably heard of this, and it's a very stable structure in a chart. But he also has what I would call a way out of the trine, exactly over to Uranus. So what can break up that trine is that the fact that Uranus opposes the moon. So this is also going to be very unusual, bringing in the designations of Uranus, which is going to be this totally out of the box way of relating to groups. So,
wow, that's a beautiful chart. I'm going to need to dig into that a little bit more. That's a really interesting chart. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Jennie. And I just want to give you also just a little list of a few other people or a group of other people that have that Sagittarius moon. And on my list, I've got, it's funny, it's mostly men on the
Yeah.
list of famous people with Sagittarius moon. We've got Neil Armstrong, talk about travel, and the bigger world view. I mean, geez, Neil Armstrong.
Literally.
And right. And Lewis Carroll, Alice Cooper, Ram Dass, Joan Didion. There's a woman, a brilliant, brilliant writer. Albert Einstein,
Wow.
Werner Erhard, Billy Graham,
Mm.
Harry Houdini, Howard Hughes, Liberace, Yoko Ono, Pablo
Yoko.
Picasso, Vincent van Gogh, and Oprah Winfrey. It's an interesting group of people.
It is. It is quite the mix.
Yeah. And you can guarantee that on an emotional level, they're all pretty opinionated.
I know. Yeah. I mean, I see a couple of Beethoven, Anthony Hopkins, Michael Jordan.
Right.
Very interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting. Okay.
Cool.
Well, thank you, Jennie, for doing this with me. And we will get together and do one on the Capricorn moon shortly. Okay. Thank
All
you.
right. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.